Hello, I'm DarcyBiz, and it's time for another Pauper Commander review, this time for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles set. Pauper Commander is a format play with 99 common cards in your deck and 1 uncommon creature or vehicle in the command zone. Unlike regular Commander, your Commander does not need to be legendary, however there are a ton of legendary creatures in this set, and so most of this list is actually made up of legendary creatures that could be your Commander in full Commander if you'd prefer. Before I start, I do want to remind everyone that Commander is whatever you want it to be. By all means, choose a commander that isn't especially strong just because you think it's cool or you think that you could eke out extra value from it. Take a look at Dream Beavers. This doesn't actually do much, but it's very cheap, and if you can repeatedly loop it through the graveyard or the command zone, it might add up to a lot of damage. I don't have high hopes for it actually working out, but it's Dream Beavers, and that's a good enough reason to build around it if you wanted to. With that said, let's get started counting down the top 10 Pauper Commanders from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Number 10, Lita, Little Orphan Amphibian. Lita is a 2-mana white 2/1 legendary mutant ninja turtle. They have Alliance. Whenever another creature you control enters, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. And then they have 3 options: put a +1/+1 counter on Lita, create a food token, or scry one. This creates for a pretty versatile creature that cares about creatures entering, and will be able to consistently grow once per turn if you have a creature enter and you choose that mode. You could build around the food mode or the scry mode, but probably what you really want is just getting a counter on this creature once every turn, making it bigger once every turn. The fact that it's 2 mana, I think, is a big deal. It means it can come down early and see the rest of the creatures you play through the rest of the game, as opposed to a card that costs more where you're going to miss out on value of the cards you played previously. Because there's a hard limit of 3 times this can trigger per turn, and if you have a preference of one mode over the others, you might only really care about triggering it once per turn, you're encouraged to do less of a go-wide strategy than you might otherwise expect, and instead just make sure you're playing at least 1 creature. Similar cards that do the same thing but are focused on only 1 mode as opposed to giving you this versatility are things like Rumor Gatherer, a 3-mana 2/1 that whenever a creature enters you scry one. If it's the second time the ability is resolved, you draw a card instead. So if you just care about the scry mode on Lita, you'd probably prefer Rumor Gatherer, even though they are 1 more mana. Number 9, Genghis Frog. Genghis Frog is a 2-mana green and blue 1/3 frog mutant rogue with trample, and whenever Genghis Frog or another mutant you control enters, create a mutagen token. Mutagen is a new token type that has the predefined text of 1, tap, sacrifice this token, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Activate only as a sorcery. This means in the simplest terms, Genghis Frog is whenever it or a mutant you control enters, you may pay an additional 1. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, which is pretty good when you think about it that way, but it has the added benefit of letting you save the mutagen token to be used later if you prefer, and it actually creates an artifact, not just a delayed trigger, which means if you have any cards that care about artifacts entering or leaving the battlefield, you can trigger those things as well. The thing about Genghis Frog is that they care specifically about mutants entering the battlefield, and so if there were not enough mutants in green and blue at common, they wouldn't do anything full stop. But there's actually a lot of options for that, and if you wanted to build a Mutant Matters deck, I think this is actually your best commander option that specifically calls out the type. Ignoring the benefit of just satisfying that niche, if we look at this purely mechanically, is it doing enough is really the question. Getting a +1/+1 counter reliably is very good, even if you have to pay 1 extra for it. That said, there are other options that can also reliably hand out +1/+1 counters. Now, a lot of things do only grow themselves, whereas Genghis Frog can hand them out because the mutagen token gives a +1/+1 counter to target creature. So we really need to compare on that axis. Arwen is a 2-mana green-blue 2/2 creature that says whenever you scry, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Common creatures that are green and blue that scry when they enter the battlefield are actually really common. And so if we built an Arwen deck in the same way we built a Genghis Frog deck, just filling it with creatures that do the thing, either are a mutant or scry on enters, we're going to have a very similar game plan. Which means Arwen probably does beat out Genghis Frog in most situations, because you're getting that +1/+1 counter immediately with no additional cost. But Genghis Frog comes built with trample, which could just be enough to make it a worthwhile side grade, if not actually better than Arwen. Number 8, Old Hob, Alley Cat Blues. Old Hob is a 5-mana red 4/4 cat mutant rebel with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/2 red mutant creature token. It gains haste until end of turn. Destroy it at the beginning of the next end step. that specifically says destroy, not sacrifice, which is relevant because of the next ability for 1 and a white, target attacking creature token gains indestructible until end of turn. So the play pattern here is at the beginning of combat, you make a 2/2, you can swing out with it and have it attack, and normally a red commander would just have it attack and die, and you let you continuously put out pressure, but not actually advance your board state, not actually continue to go wide. Old Hob lets you pay an additional 2 and keep that token around. But it's better than just if you pay 2, it doesn't get sacrificed, because it also allows it to be attacking aggressively all the time without it just dying to blockers. I think this has a lot of really interesting options. The big problem here is just that it is a 5 mana commander. There's a lot of red commanders that can give you those extra bodies every turn, and I don't know if this 2/2 can compete when you need to be continually paying an additional 2 to keep it around. That said, it also has a red-white color identity because of that activated ability, so it's not really fair to compare it directly to red commanders. Number 7, Karai, Future of the Foot. Karai is a 3-mana white and black 3/3 legendary human ninja with whenever Karai deals combat damage to a player, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. If her sneak cost was paid this turn, instead return that card to the battlefield. And they have a sneak cost of 2 white and black. Sneak is a new mechanic from the set, which means you can cast this spell for its sneak cost and return an unblocked attacker you control to play it in the middle of combat, tapped and attacking, with no opportunity for your opponent to then block it, because blockers have already been declared. This means a lot of the time you are going to want to be sneaking this in for 4 mana, getting an immediate trigger, reanimating a creature in your graveyard directly to the battlefield, which is a lot of value for effectively a 4 mana commander. On future turns, if you can continue to get combat damage with Karai, you get to continue to return creatures to your hand. I know that I always underestimate the power of returning creatures from your graveyard to your hand. It's basically card draw, but you have more card selection because you can choose anything that's in your graveyard. Sure, you have to get a creature, and if you really want to draw something that's not, you're out of luck. But if this just said, when she deals combat damage, draw a card, if her sneak cost was paid, instead return a creature from the graveyard, I think that would be really good, and that's basically what you're seeing here. However, it's a lot of moving parts. You have to have an unblocked attacker that you can use to sneak her in. You have to have creatures in your graveyard, milling over them or discarding them previously. If you want to continue to get in damage with her, you need to then give her evasion once she's already stuck on the board. Or if you want to bounce her to your hand to re-sneak her in, you need to have tools to do that too. It's just a lot going on, and I think it makes for a really interesting commander, but it could be a really messy pile, so she only gets my number 7 slot on the list. Number 6, April, Reporter of the Weird. April is a 3-mana 2/2 legendary human detective. Whenever April deals combat damage to a player, draw that many cards, then discard a card. That is, draw cards equal to the amount of damage you dealt to that player. This ability to refill your hand, even if you have to discard one, is very strong. But you do have to be able to get damage in with her, which means you're going to have to supply some form of evasion in the rest of your deck. The way I see this card, she could make a really interesting Voltron commander, where you're making sure you're giving her protection and evasion and buffing her damage, and then once you've dedicated those resources to protecting and buffing April, she gets in damage and draws you more options to continue to protect her, to continue to grow her. And I think it could create for a really, really powerful all-in on April build. April can be directly compared to Fear of Failed Tests, which has the same line of text except for it doesn't make you discard a card. The difference is that Fear of Failed Test is a 5-mana commander, although admittedly, they are also a 2/7. Between those two, I think April just far and away wins that comparison. Being able to come down earlier in the game or wait until you have time to protect them as soon as you bring them down, and the discarding 1 card is really not that big of a cost if you're drawing 3, 4, 5 cards. But maybe you want to be discarding cards. A different card that you can compare to April is actually Horrid Shadow Spinner. Horrid Shadow Spinner is a blue and black card that's a 2/3 with lifelink that says whenever it attacks, you draw cards equal to its power and then discard that many cards. So this is happening as soon as they attack. You don't even have to get in damage, which is a big upside compared to April. But you're not just discarding 1, you're discarding all of the cards. This still gives you a lot of card selection, but maybe more importantly, it fills your graveyard. And if you really want to do something interesting with your graveyard, it could be a very, very good commander for that. April lets you kind of walk the line between these two worlds, drawing cards and actually increasing your hand size, not just breaking even like you would with Horrid Shadow Spinner, but you do get to discard 1 card, effectively being the best of both worlds. Number 5, Mighty Mutanimals. Mighty Mutanimals is a 4-mana white 2/1 mutant rebel and our only non-legendary on the list. When this creature enters, create a 2/2 red mutant creature token, and it has Alliance. Whenever another creature you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Bare minimum, this is a 4-mana 2/1 that comes along with a 2/2 body and immediately hands out a +1/+1 counter either to itself, that mutant token, or anything else you control, which is a lot of value for 4 mana even if you don't get further value out of it. They also compare pretty directly to our number 10 slot of Lita, where they have this Alliance trigger that's going to hand out +1/+1 counters. As opposed to Lita, who only gets 1 counter per turn, because you have to choose different modes for any other Alliance triggers in the same turn, Mighty Mutanimals is going to only be handing out counters, which I think is generally the best mode in most situations anyway. Additionally, they actually get to hand out +1/+1 counters, which could be themselves or any other creature, as opposed to Lita, who only grows herself. As mentioned with Lita, coming down on 2 is a significant upside. So Mighty Mutanimals might feel too slow, and I don't want to say that one is strictly better than the other. Obviously, I think Mighty Mutanimals is a stronger card, generally speaking. It's higher slot on this list, but both are still in the conversation. One does not invalidate the other. Number 4, Lord Dregg, Insect Invader. Lord Dregg is a 4-mana black 3/2 insect warrior with flying and disappear. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent left the battlefield under your control this turn, create a 1/1 black insect warrior creature token with flying. They also have an activated ability for 3 and a green, sacrifice a token, draw a card. This of course increases their commander color identity to black-green, giving you a lot more options than if this was just a mono black card. But either way, this is just a card that is going to be able to reliably create bodies. But not just any 1/1 bodies, these have flying, which should not be understated. That is a significant upgrade compared to a lot of other commander options. The last mode that lets you sacrifice a token at the cost of 4 mana to draw a card seems pretty expensive most of the time, but if you're in a long game and you have more mana than you know what to do with, it's a great way to make sure you can refill. It is a really solid backup plan, even if it is not your main game plan. But not having a backup plan at all can sometimes get you stuck in situations where you're in the late game and you have nothing to do. So this mode is really going to help you refill when you need to. As for the disappear trigger of needing a permanent to leave the battlefield, remember that is a permanent. This could be a pretty traditional Black Aristocrats plan where you have a lot of creatures that you're sacrificing, and then every turn you're getting a new body that you can then sacrifice on a future turn. But also, Black and Green are surprisingly good at making treasures at common. Any treasure that you sacrifice will immediately satisfy the disappear trigger of Lord Dregg. So as long as you sacrifice 1 treasure every turn, you don't even have to be going down creatures to be able to expand your board. Number 3, Venus, Torn Between Worlds. Venus is a 5-mana 5/5 mutant frog turtle with whenever Venus is dealt damage, put that many +1/+1 counters on her. That is, +1/+1 counters equal to the amount of damage done. Whenever a creature you control with a counter on it deals combat damage to a player, you may pay blue. If you do, draw a card. This is again a very expensive commander, so your mileage may vary, but it's the kind of commander that can grow very reliably and very fast. At baseline, if you just attack with Venus, your opponents have to make the choice between blocking her and giving you a counter, or letting you get through. If she already has a counter, you can then pay blue and draw a card. Paying every time you deal damage to draw cards is not the best, but paying 1 to draw 1 card is a pretty good rate most of the time, and I think it's perfectly reasonable here. Where things get really fun is when you play around in the space of green fight spells. Fight spells have you choose a creature you control and a creature your opponent controls, and has those two deal damage equal to their powers to each other. If you have Venus fight another creature, as long as that creature is smaller than Venus, you can use a fight spell as removal and grow Venus equal to that creature's power. Don't forget that the cost of 1 blue mana in her triggered ability means that she counts as having a blue color identity. So even though she inherently does not have any evasion, you can run all the blue auras that give her flying to help her get in, just like we talked about with April. If you've given her flying, you can play around with a lot of really funny cards that Green has that only does damage to flying creatures. There's a bunch of these where Green is normally not that good at dealing damage to creatures outside of fights, bites, or to flying creatures exclusively. This means anything like Scatter Scattershot Archer can tap to deal damage to each of your opponent's flyers, hopefully killing them so that they can't actually block Venus, and now that Venus has flying, doing 1 damage to her to buff her up another counter. I just think that's funny. I don't know if that's actually the best way to build her, but that just seems really fun to me. Number 2, Pizzaface Gastromancer. Pizzaface is a 5-mana black and green 2/4 legendary artifact food mutant. When Pizzaface enters, create a food token, and they have disappear at the beginning of your end step. If a permanent left the battlefield under your control this turn, put 3 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 other target artifact or creature. If it isn't a creature, it becomes a 0/0 mutant creature in addition to its other types. They then also have an activated ability of 10 mana, tap, sacrifice Pizzaface, you gain 15 life. I don't think that last mode matters, don't worry about it. But the disappear ability seems so strong. If you can satisfy the disappear requirement, which we've already established is pretty easy in black and green with Lord Dregg, you get to animate an artifact into a 3/3 creature every turn. As long as you can reliably have artifacts to animate, this is effectively creating a 3/3 every turn. We've already talked about Old Hob with a 2/2, or Dregg with 1/1s. A 3/3 every turn is a big deal. And if you don't have artifacts lying around to animate, you can still just increase the power of something by 3, which is so much more than the ones that we talk about most of the time. The downside of Pizzaface is that you do have this condition you have to satisfy, which you might not be able to. But more importantly, they can't buff themselves. Pizzaface can only put +1/+1 counters on other creatures or artifacts. This is more of a go wide strategy, unless you have like a single trampler you want to load up with counters, and then you have the option of going tall instead. It's a really versatile commander that I think is going to be really strong. Before we get to number 1, I want to go over a few honorable mentions. These are cards that looked really good, and they are pretty strong. Again, try them out if you think they're cool, if you think they're fun, but you should know that they didn't make the list not because they weren't strong, but because there are existing better options. First, we have Donatello, Way with Machines, a 3-mana 1/2 flyer that says when an artifact you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on Donatello. In Edge of Eternities, there was Memnon, Uthros Exile, which is a 3-mana blue and red 1/3 with flying that says whenever an artifact you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So Memnon has 1 additional color in their color identity, 1 additional toughness, and they can hand out +1/+1 counters instead of only growing themselves. All these combine to Donatello just not really being able to make it onto this list, even though it is a very strong card. Next is Mona Lisa, Science Geek. Mona Lisa is a 3-mana 1/3 lizard mutant with reach, and to tap, add X mana of any one color. X is Mona Lisa's power. There's a bunch of cards that do this, so there's a whole bunch of things that it has to compete with, and I think for most of them, it does pretty well. 3 mana for a 1/3 reach is a pretty good rate, and then as she grows, you get to add more and more mana. The problem is that Kami of Whispered Hopes is almost always going to be considered stronger. Kami of Whispered Hopes is a 3-mana 1/1, so that's a downside. They might die before they get to do anything, which is a shame. But they have the text of, if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent you control, that many +1 +1/+1 counters are put on that permanent instead. And then they have the same tap at X mana style ability where X is their power. While it starts with less toughness than Mona Lisa and could easily die to damage or -1/-1 effects, it's going to grow faster because the main way of growing is probably going to be +1/+1 counters in either case, and it's going to be giving you an additional counter every time you do that, as well as benefiting the rest of your team if you are going wide with +1/+1 counter synergies. If you don't want to do +1/+1 counter synergies, you might prefer Mona Lisa just because it starts at higher toughness, but for the most part, Kami Whispered Hopes is going to grow faster, which means it can make more mana sooner. Next, Splinter Hamatoyoshi is a 2-mana 1/3 mutant ninja rat with sneak of single black, and it has menace and other ninjas you control get +1/+1. This is a mono black card. It can sneak in very cheaply, which is pretty cool, and it buffs all of your ninjas, which is nice, and it has menace itself. However, it has to directly compete with Silver Fur Master, a 2-mana black and blue 2/2 ninja that has ninjutsu of black and blue. Ninjutsu is like Sneak, but it's the older version, and you just put it into play. It doesn't actually get cast, which has a few fringe interactions, Ninjutsu can't be done from the command zone is the most notable thing. But it goes on to say ninjutsu abilities you control cost 1 less to activate, and other ninja and rogue creatures you control get +1/+1, making it just benefit your board so much better, giving you more options because of its color identity. It's really hard to compare Splinter to Silver Fur Master, which really was the original homage to Splinter in the first place. And with all that said, on to number 1 Pauper Commander from TMNT, the Neutrinos. The Neutrinos are a 4-mana red and white 2/4 elf rebel with flying. They have Alliance. Whenever another creature you control enters, the Neutrinos get +1/+0 until end of turn. And whenever the Neutrinos attack, exile up to 1 target creature you own, then return it to the battlefield under your control, tapped and attacking. This, at the baseline, is just a 2/4 flyer that gets bigger temporarily when creatures you control enter, making it a very strong aggressive threat in the air. It also gives your creatures pseudo haste. If you play a creature that doesn't have haste and then move to combat, the Neutrinos can blink that creature, exile it, return to the battlefield, tapped and attacking, and it was effectively able to attack the same turn it entered. Also, this triggers the Neutrino a second time in the same turn, so they're going to be swinging as a 4/4 in that scenario. If you're playing around with any sort of enter the battlefield triggers, you're going to be getting an additional use out of them every turn that you attack with the Neutrinos. Now, the important thing to remember here is that they are entering tapped and attacking, which can be an upside in an aggressive deck, but it also can be a liability in a deck where you don't want your blink target to die in combat. So you might need to have some ways of protecting your pieces at instant speed, but for the most part, this is just creating so much value, and it seems like just a really fun build around. It's giving you a lot of different pieces of value that add together to make a really solid picture, as opposed to pulling you in different directions. It's not a ton of different moving parts, even though it does end up benefiting you along 3 different axes. Now, if you only care about this as a blink commander, the important thing here is that it is white and red, which sets it apart from other blink commanders that do admittedly probably do it better. Soul Herder is probably the most well-known blink commander in Pauper Commander. It is a 3-mana white and blue 1/1 that says whenever a creature is exiled from the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on Soul Herder, and at the beginning of your end step, you may exile another target creature you control and return it to the battlefield. So you get to blink every single end step, and Soul Herder is going to grow in the process. It does not expose the creature being blinked to dying in combat, and it is very, very reliable. But it is in blue-white as opposed to white-red, and so you have different options for your blink targets, making both of them feel like interesting side grades from each other instead of one being strictly better. That brings us to the end of my top 10 Pauper Commanders from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. All in all, I do think that this set was a little bit light in Pauper Commander options, but the ones we do have do feel really, really strong. And I'm really excited to try and build around some of these pieces, especially the Neutrinos, which really did catch my eye. And you know what? Let me know in the comments if I was biased and put it too high on this list. Have a good night, everyone. I've been Darcy Bits. I'll see you next set.